Diabetes Club of Tindikal to all the delegates present here. The options for the treatment of the disease diabetes mellitus is growing every day as we are unraveling the various pathophysiologies of the disease. The growing disease burden of the diabetes mellitus demands each and every doctor to be aware of the therapeutic options, indications, and the correct usage of the drugs. With this vision to educate all the doctors of different specialty about the global disease diabetes mellitus, here is our 102nd scientific program from the Diabetes Club of Tindikal, a virtual session owing to the pandemic, dealing with one another therapeutic option, the gliptins. I invite our chairman to present the welcome address.
Good evening, friends. Sir, I am audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Good evening, friends. It's my pleasure to welcome you all for our Diabetic Club of Tindikal Scientific Program 102. It is the 102nd program. First, I welcome our patrons of our club, Dr. Murli sir, Madhi sir, Segar sir, and I welcome all of you, sirs. I am pleased to welcome our DCD members and all friends attending this meeting, sir. My special and warm welcome to today's speaker, sir, Dr. Anantharaman, endocrinologist and hepatologist, sir. We are eagerly waiting to receive your academic feast from you, sir. Once again, welcoming all who are attending this program, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is from the desk of secretary. The works of our FB and YouTube channel are still in pipeline as the COVID pandemic occupied most of our time. Soon you can expect the regular updates in both FB and YouTube channel. Regarding the e-journal, our patrons Dr. Muralidharan and Dr. J.C. Shekhar sir have accepted to sponsor the cost of the first e-journal, and Dr. Kamaraj, our vice chairman, will be the chief editor and I will be co-editing with him. And we have decided to publish our e-journal 3 months once, since the back work is really time consuming. And our e-journal will contain all these articles: main article, real case scenario, quiz corner, ask the expert, memories, tidbits on diabetes mellitus and diet taboos. I request all our members to contribute for the journal. We'll be completing our journal and publishing it on August 1st week. And I suggest to have an office bearers meet every second weekend of the month to discuss. Let it be an online meeting and take decision about our function of the DCD club. This we can further have discussion in our WhatsApp group. Our last meeting, 101st scientific program by Dr. G. Shanmuga Sundaram sir, was a very clinically relevant topic, and after the session, many of us have started using hydroxychloroquines in our daily practice with more confidence for treating the diabetes mellitus. And today we have Dr. Anantharaman with us to deliver the lecture on the topic choosing the gliptins, simplifying the options for us. We have our vice chairman, J. Kamaraj sir, to introduce the speaker here. Sir, unmute yourself, sir.
Good morning, Diabetic Club. Good evening, Diabetic Club of Tindikal. First of all, I thank to the Diabetic Club of Tindikal, our chairman, sir, Dr. Anbuchilvan sir, our secretary, madam, Dr. Anita madam, and the finance secretary, Dr. Sadish sir, to given these opportunities. I am going to introduce our speaker, Dr. A. Anantharaman sir. He finished his MD General Medicine in JIPMER and DM Endocrinology, PG Chandigarh. Both are very reputed and excellent institutes. He's a consultant endocrinologist in NACNA Center of Obesity and Diabetes Endocrinology. His academic credential, he's a university gold medalist in JIPMER in MD Internal Medicine, and ex-faculty of St. John's Medical College and the Department of Endocrinology. He published a lot of articles and more publications and got more awards. His area of interest is diabetes-related food complications and type 1 diabetic therapy, lifestyle management, obesity, and PCOS. Today he is going to present the topic is choosing the gliptins. I invite our speaker to deliver the topics. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for those kind words, sir. And thank you, madam, for having me over. And this is, I have, in the past also, I have spoken in Dindigul Diabetes Club in person. That was, I think, some years ago. And I'm glad to be back again. Madam, can I be allowed to share my slides?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
if, yeah,
I'll
yeah.
stop sharing.
Today's topic is actually very simple and straightforward. I think, all of you are many of you are practicing diabetes. Like you said, many are, are doing general practice, and, we want to enhance their knowledge of diabetes among all physicians. That is a very noble goal, actually. Why? Because, diabetes, most of the diabetes is actually seen by non-diabetes specialists, actually. So if you see a hospital admission, 80% of hospital admitted patients have diabetes, actually. So knowing how to manage diabetes is a job of every doctor in this country, not only specifically diabetologists, more so the generalist, actually. How to safely manage diabetes for those few days in which you are in the hospital, that's very important. Madam, could you mute? Someone is speaking in the background, ma'am. Yeah. Today I'm going to talk about choosing the gliptin. So which gliptin to choose among the various gliptins. So first we'll talk about gliptins in general, and then we'll talk about the comparison between the gliptins and which gliptin to choose. And of course, we have a gliptin called vildagliptin, which is generic in our country and available for a very low cost. It is available in our Jan Aushadhi pharmacy also at a much lesser cost, actually. And also we have branded generics also from various companies, and this is a huge advance for our patients, actually. And what is the advantage of, and what is the data and what is the science behind it, we'll try to understand today. So I'll be speaking more about vildagliptin rather than about all other gliptins, and try to compare how vildagliptin differs or how it is similar or better than other gliptins. So we know that insulin resistance in muscle and liver and beta cell failure represent the core pathophysiological defect in type 2 diabetes. This has been well known for the last 2-3 decades. So, but what we have lately realized is that the beta cell failure occurs much earlier and it's much more severe than previously thought. So earlier, when you look at the UKPDS study, they used to always say that 50% of the beta cell function is lost by the time the diabetes is diagnosed. But when you actually do studies on our patients with IGT, higher tertiles of IGT patients, these are not even diabetic patients, those are about to get diabetes, we find that they have lost almost 80% of beta cell function. The modern studies which you sensitively look at the beta cell function, because we can look at beta cell function in different ways. Beta cell function is actually difficult to study. So when you compare it with healthy individuals, what becomes apparent is that around 80% of the beta cell function has to be lost before diabetes can be manifested. So this is true to form for any endocrine organ. So if you look at thyroid also, 80% of thyroid function has to be lost before the TSH even starts rising. So even if the TSH becomes 12, 13, 80% of thyroid function must be lost, actually. So because the endocrine glands have got enormous capacity to adapt to insulin resistance. So if somebody's insulin resistance goes up, the beta cell compensates by producing more and more insulin. So what if someone's beta cell is weak genetically? So they are not able to, it is not able to produce adequate insulin. Therefore, it fails. And when it fails, the blood glucose goes up, causing diabetes. So this is a simple reason or why the diabetes occurs in individuals. This is the genesis. So we are all aware of ominous octet. Actually, I think this was the logo that you had presented in your masthead for Dindigul Diabetes Club. Actually, so in addition to let us try to understand this picture a little bit more closely. We know that there is poor beta cell function, decreased insulin cell production. There is muscle insulin resistance and increased hepatic glucose output. These are the traditional trio. Actually, added to that is some other dysfunctions which are actually worsening the diabetes for the individual. It is not that the beta cell dysfunction only is causing diabetes. Other conditions are also worsening the diabetic condition and increasing the sugar. What are those? One is increased glucagon secretion. This could be a result of the insulin secretory defect, or it could be an independent abnormality. There are several lines of evidence which says that it's an independent abnormality. Okay. So also there is a decreased incretin effect. So what are incretins? They are hormones produced from the intestine which act on the beta cell to make them produce more insulin. So incretin itself may be reduced. So this may be a problem. So there could be neurotransmitter dysfunction causing overeating also in individuals. So appetite dysfunction is also a cause or a trigger for calorie excess and diabetes, and in turn diabetes actually. And also we have increased glucose reabsorption. So the kidney may be involved in worsening the diabetes. It's not that the beta cell is not dysfunctioning alone. Some group of individuals with certain amount of beta cell function have worse diabetes because they are reabsorbing more glucose from the proximal convoluted tubules than they should actually. So increased absorption of glucose could be the cause for hyperglycemia in the individual. So this is a ominous octet which was figured, this term came into usage from 2009 actually. So, and we use it a lot actually. So now we understand the pathophysiology of diabetes more clearly and more widely. So what should be the ideal anti-hyperglycemic agent? So one therapy which we should choose should address multiple pathophysiologies. It should not tackle only one pathophysiology. So it should tackle multiple pathophysiologies. For example, if you use sulfonylurea, you will be treating only the beta cell dysfunction. What the sulfonylurea does is it will only release insulin from the beta cell. It will not improve insulin resistance. It will not improve the glucose reabsorption. It will not improve the incretin protection. Okay, but certain therapies increase everything actually. They improve the beta cell function, incretin production, everything will improve actually. So for example, biguanide, alpha glucosidase inhibitor, metformin is biguanide basically. So metformin does several actions. One is it improves the, reduces the hepatic glucose output, and also it improves metabolism at the cellular level. It is not an insulin, classic insulin sensitizer, but it improves the through the AMP kinase pathway. It makes sure that glucose utilization is increased also, and improves, certain drugs will suppress the glucagon production, like incretin-based therapies suppress the glucagon production because there is a severe alpha cell dysfunction also, which is driving hyperglycemia. So, and SGLT2 inhibitors, of course, suppress glucose reabsorption. The drug combination that seems most logical therapy is an incretin-based therapy because it addresses 4 out of 8 pathophysiological mechanisms along with metformin and or thiazolidinedione. So what are these 4 pathophysiological mechanisms? One is a beta cell dysfunction. Directly, incretin-based therapies can actually make the beta cell produce more insulin. Second one is it reduces the neurotransmitter dysfunction. So there is neurotransmitter dysfunction more for GLP-1 analogs, less so for DPP-4 inhibitors. But DPP-4 inhibitors also have some role in reducing appetite. Okay, so there are studies which have shown that. And third abnormality is your glucagon production, it reduces. Fourth one is mild insulin sensitizing action could be there. So all of these things could be contributing to the action of DPP-4 inhibitors. So along with metformin and thiazolidinedione, they tackle multiple pathophysiological factors. So they are a novel class of agents. They are no longer novel. We use it commonly. I think they were introduced when I was doing my DM 2008-9, and they've been in usage. I've used it all along in my practice actually. From the year 2008-9, I've been using gliptins actually. So starting with Vilda and sitagliptin only. So it improves beta cell health and suppress glucagon, resulting in improved postprandial and fasting hyperglycemia. What do they do? How do they function? They are actually basically enzyme inhibitors. They are small protein molecules. They are small chemicals which actually block the enzyme DPP4, dipeptidyl peptidase 4. And what does this DPP4 do? It breaks down the GLP-1 and GIP. Okay, what are GLP-1 and GIP? They are incretin hormones. They are produced by the intestine. They work on the the beta cell and also alpha cell. Beta cell, they work on beta cell and make it produce more insulin. So if you inhibit the DPP4 enzyme, you make more GLP-1 available at the GLP-1 receptor in the beta cell, and this in turn causes more insulin release basically. So by suppressing the DPP4 enzyme, you make the GLP-1 level more by 50%, and this 50% increase in GLP-1 results in better glycemic control. What about whether you can use GLP-1 directly? That therapy is also available, but when you use GLP-1 therapy directly, it goes up not 50%, it goes up 3 to 4-fold higher actually, typically. And when you go 3 to 4-fold higher, you get other effects like suppression of appetite, okay, and loss of weight, which you don't see with DPP4 inhibitors. So DPP4 inhibitor, what is the best feature of DPP4 inhibitors? They are side effect free because they are very highly targeted molecules. I would say DPP4 is the first in the line of very well targeted molecules. It is a result of years of research actually. So we have found out an enzyme which has got a critical role to play in metabolism, and we have found out a target molecule which takes out only that enzyme and nothing else. Okay, and this thing. So for example, in the earlier days, we used to use any molecule to cause hypoglycemia. In fact, quinine used to be used to treat hyperglycemia. I think you all mentioned that hydroxychloroquine can be used to treat diabetes, isn't it? So prior to hydroxychloroquine, it was actually quinine was used to treat hypoglycemia. It was a side effect of quinine which was used to treat hyperglycemia actually. But then these are all fortuitously discovered. Gliptins are the first set of molecules which are not fortuitous, but they're actually designed for that purpose. If you take thiazolidinediones are also fortuitously discovered actually. So in fact, the thiazolidinediones were first identified, then we found out the receptor, the nuclear receptor in which it acts actually. Gliptins are that way unique molecules. They are a result of modern science basically and investigation into this diabetes pathogenesis. So what are the different types of DPP4 inhibitors? We have we can broadly classify them into peptidomimetics and non-peptidomimetics. What are non-peptidomimetics? Sitagliptin, alogliptin, and linagliptin. All are available. Even aloe is available in our country now. Okay, and we have peptidomimetics, which are mainly vildagliptin and saxagliptin. What is the difference between the two? So non-peptidomimetics form non-covalent extracellular interactions. Okay, at the catalytic site of DPP4, but this results in potent but immediate control. They are fast acting actually, whereas vildagliptin is long acting. So if you want to understand the difference between peptido and non-peptidomimetic, so vildagliptin is long acting, whereas sita, lina, and aloe are fast acting, I would say. In contrast, inhibition of DPP4 substrate by peptidomimetics forms reversible covalent enzyme complex. So if you miss a tablet of vildagliptin, unlikely that after the patient has taken it for a long time, it is unlikely to result in increased blood sugar that very time, because it will have a longer duration of action actually. So that is the implication of that. But overall, what we see is that there is not much to choose between the gliptins. All of them are equally effective when you look at the clinical effect. So this I will skip actually. So What about glycemic control? How well does vildagliptin control the sugars? See, we are not pharmacologists actually. We are concerned about controlling the blood sugar of the patient. Patients primarily come to us because the blood sugars are high. They want to take treatment for glucose control. Of course, we want to treat all other risk factors, reduce cardiovascular risk, etc. Everything we want to do. But then primarily they come to us for glucose control. As a first-line therapy, Vilda is not inferior to metformin with respect to A1C reduction with beneficial effect of insulin sensitivity as well as beta cell function. As an add-on to metformin, Vilda is as effective as sulfonylurea like glimepiride, gliclazide, but has lower incidence of hypoglycemia. This is one of the important reasons why gliptins have been so successful. Their side effect profile is similar to that of placebo. Okay, so in RCTs, if you look at the side effects that happen with vildagliptin, that will be similar to or even lesser than that of placebo actually. So the patient will not realize that he or she is actually taking a medicine. Okay, so this is the meaning, this is the implication of the this is the ease of use of gliptins. Almost it's a fire and forget molecule. Okay, even the ADA and RSSDI advocate the use of DPP-4 as second line medicine. So we will come back to the second line a little later. In fact, we should now there is evidence that we should use it upfront as soon as you diagnose the patient with type 2 diabetes. So are well tolerated. This is what I alluded to earlier. For patients with renal insufficiency, vildagliptin dose has to be reduced a little bit. And the VIVID trial did show that vildagliptin, did not have adverse effect on reducing in heart failure patients actually. So this is the data from various studies which is pooled together. It shows that the odds ratio for cardiovascular events is lower with vildagliptin than when compared to other gliptins. So for example, we have got RCT data with sitagliptin. We don't have RCT data with vildagliptin. For vildagliptin, we have got data pooled from various smaller RCTs. It's a meta-analysis basically. So in that, what it shows is that there can be a modest 10 to 11% reduction in the cardiovascular risk. It can be anywhere from 60% reduction or 60% reduction to a 4% reduction in the cardiovascular risk. That's what the confidence interval says. So, this can be expected with this thing, though we do not have a direct study, cardiovascular outcome study. Like we have cardiovascular outcome study with Saxa, Lina, Alo, and sitagliptin, but we do not have one for vildagliptin. This is mainly because of regulatory considerations. It's not because vildagliptin is not a good molecule, and Vilda was introduced before these outcome studies ever came out actually. So when you look at the various gliptins, Sita, Vilda, Saxa, Alo, so this is how we can understand how often we need to give them. Is it renally handled or not? Okay, so we want to, if there is a renally handled molecule, obviously you need to reduce the dose. Okay, for example, sitagliptin, we need to go down to 25 milligrams if the patient is on hemodialysis or stage 4, stage 5 nephropathy. Vildagliptin, we need to simply reduce the dose from twice daily to once daily. Usually it's given twice daily, vildagliptin molecule. Okay, so dose reduction is not required in mild to moderate liver impairment. Okay, HbA1c lowering, it shows similar efficacy to other gliptins. And monotherapy HbA1c lowering, we have got excellent data with Vilda showing up to 1% lowering of HbA1c. So I'll allude to the VERIFY trial. I think whenever we talk about vildagliptin, we must know about the VERIFY trial. So what is the VERIFY trial? VERIFY trial attempted to study the hypothesis. See, for example, when a patient is newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, whether we should just give him only one drug or two drugs. That's a simple hypothesis that was studied. And what kind of patients were studied in VERIFY trial? This is very interesting. So they studied patients who had HbA1c between 6.5 and 7.5. So typically those were very early on in the course of the disease. Okay, what was the primary outcome of the trial? The primary outcome of the trial was to find out how many people failed the drug, that is either metformin 2 times or vildagliptin plus metformin 2 times. Okay, how many people failed the drug, and and what is the duration to fail the drug? Meaning by that, what is the durability of metformin compared to the durability of vildagliptin metformin. So, so very often, when the gliptins came, many doctors used to say that, you are combining it with metformin and giving, that's why it's working very well. I mean, so this used to be the common refrain between 2008 and 2012. Okay, we do not know whether metformin is working or vildagliptin is working, right? So then that's why they designed this study. The study was designed in 2012 and it started recruiting in 2013-14. So obviously, in order to prove that it is long lasting, it should be a very long trial. So it took us a long time to conclude, of course, So this is the result actually, the probability of initial treatment failure. Okay. So if there is less failure, it's a better drug. So the lower the curve, the better the drug. So the blue curve is metformin versus plus vildagliptin, and the red curve is metformin plus placebo. So, and the study required that the HbA1c should be more than 7% on 2 separate occasions, 13 weeks apart. So over a period of at least 3 months, the HbA1c should be actually more than 7% in order to consider a failure. For example, somebody's HbA1c goes up to 7%, comes back to 6.5%. That was not considered failure. They took only strict criteria for failure. Okay. So the answer is very interesting actually. So the initial treatment failure rate was 43.6% in patients in combination group versus 62.1% the late combination therapy group. Okay. So the initial failure rate itself was very high when you just gave only metformin. Only when you give metformin, 62% of the patients will fail within the 12-month period actually. And median time to failure in late combination was 36 months. And it was 61.9 months for the early combination group. So if you gave the drug early, you tend to last longer basically. So you have a long duration of good control. And also another thing they wanted to study was there any tolerability issue? So if upfront, if you have a patient coming with 6.5 to 7.5 HbA1c, newly diagnosed patient who has just come to you with diabetes, that's all. He has come to you asking, oh, my sugar is just high, my A1C is 6.7, what should I do? Okay, Verify trial says that if you put him on vildagliptin metformin, there is, this treatment will be good enough for 60 months, that is 5 years, they'll be absolutely fine. Okay, and see, why give a lot of drugs upfront to younger patients actually? So I usually give the analogy of a cricket team. Okay, so whenever you have a cricket team, you will never send the bowler out to bat first. Why? Because if you send the bowler out to bat first, he will get out basically. And then you cannot play the entire 50 overs. So what is the objective of us treating diabetes? The objective of us to treat diabetes is to make the patient live long. That is, play a long innings. So, and we all know that, life is a limited overs game. We cannot make anybody live 200 years. There is a normal lifespan for the individual. There is going to be deterioration in our old age. But then, we want to make the patient achieve the normal genetic potential he has. So that is the purpose of modern medicine. So if you look at it that way, we should actually medicate the patient early rather than late and go for aggressive combination therapy. And Verify trial gives you the RCT level evidence. This is the best evidence that you can get for this thing. And it used the intention to treat analysis, not a per protocol analysis, which makes the trial results very strong. Okay, it does not apply to only those individuals who completed the course of treatment. Applies to everybody who joined the treatment. Okay, so these are some of the studies which compare vildagliptin metformin with various other combinations. It shows excellent efficacy. So I'll not go deep into that. I'll just rush through these slides. Actually, I think we have spent almost 30 minutes. So vildagliptin added on to insulin. One important thing to note is we tend to stop insulin when stop these gliptins when the patient is on insulin. We shouldn't do that. Okay, because why? Because RCTs have shown that when you add vildagliptin, you actually reduce the insulin dose and improve the glycemic control and reduce the glycemic variability. And some studies have even shown that the hypoglycemia rate is less when you give vildagliptin with insulin. So vildagliptin reduces the glucagon level and glucagon dysfunction rather. So glucagon is required for fighting hypoglycemia. So it prevents glucagon dysfunction, and appropriate production of glucagon is restored. Appropriate alpha cell function is restored in those who are on vildagliptin. So on insulin, it shows that conventional therapy with vildagliptin. So you can see that there is a excellent reduction in HbA1c with vildagliptin when added onto insulin. Vildagliptin also reduces the dose and number of insulin injections when you give it to insulin-treated patients. So in short, I will say this much: generic vildagliptin has excellent clinical data, and we should be using it in every patient who's diagnosed with diabetes. So if a patient, based on the verified trial, the only drawback with vildagliptin that other people will point out is that we don't have a cardiovascular outcome trial for vildagliptin or vildagliptin metformin combination. We do have data from the UKPDS for metformin, and we have indirect evidence on cardiovascular safety from various phase 3 trials done with vildagliptin and several other RCTs done later. If you put all of that, you have excellent number of patients studied in the RCT setting, which shows that the CV risk is less with vildagliptin. And in the Indian scenario where it is generic, I feel this is the ideal gliptin we should give to all our patients who are newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So with that, I'll conclude my talk. I think if there are any comments or suggestions, questions, we can take them. Yeah.
Do you say that all the gliptins are equally potent in reducing the blood sugars?
Yes, madam. All of them are equally good, I would say. I mean, there are no head-to-head studies with various gliptins, basically. So vildagliptin may have a slightly longer duration of action. So what this implies is that, if somebody skips a tablet, it's a 2-day tablet, two times a day tablet. So if someone skips a tablet, the sugar may not go up during that time because it's got a longer duration of action. Okay. And this thing, and because of the covalent binding, so even after the drug has disappeared from the circulation, there tends to be a continued DPP4 inhibition that you will get.
I don't understand why we give it bi-daily if it has a longer duration of action, but we give all the other gliptins as once daily options.
Yes, ma'am. So I'll explain to you. When the DPP4 will actually bind covalently, actually. So, but it has got DPP4 itself has got a less duration of action in the blood, actually. So it will just go hit and then come out, basically. But once the DPP4 binds to once the vildagliptin binds to the DPP4 enzyme, it will inhibit for 12 to 14 hours, actually. So what happens is that if you top it up every 12 hours, you keep on giving 12 hours, so it achieves a sustained DPP4 inhibition over a period of 2 weeks, actually. 1 or 2 weeks you're given it achieves a sustained 80% and above DPP4 inhibition. If you look at the the DPP4 inhibition level, Sita and Vilda are on par with each other, actually. Almost 80% DPP4 inhibition is got. So the best way to understand gliptin action is looking at the percentage DPP4 inhibition. So the criteria in preclinical studies is that at least 80% DPP4 inhibition it should give. If it is not giving DPP4 inhibition of 80%, it's unlikely to be successful, actually. But if you look at the DPP4 inhibition level, the best is with vildagliptin, I would say. I mean, the data says the first gliptin which we have is the best what we have. And if you skip a tablet accidentally, it should not matter, actually, because the longer duration of gliptin, from 80% it will drop to 60%. It will not drop to 40%, 30%, etc. That's what I meant.
Sir, excuse me. What I understood from the studies is vildagliptin, if it is given twice a day, then it maintains a 80% inhibition, DPP4 enzyme inhibition. Otherwise, the inhibition is only 40%. This was I understood from the studies. Whereas linagliptin is a truly a 24-hour action of gliptin. It covers with once daily dose. It gives 80% inhibition. Whereas vildagliptin, from the many studies, what I understood is, if you skip a dose, you will be getting only 40 to 50% inhibition only. What is your opinion, sir?
It's not true actually. So it has got a very tight binding to the DPP4 enzyme. The decay is not much actually. But what is more important than all this is the kind of control what we get actually. What we have seen in clinical practice is that the HbA1c reduction, what we get with Sita, Vilda, are both comparable actually. And definitely it works better than teneligliptin. There is no doubt about it. So, and we've been using it for so many years actually. So what matters is the final HbA1c lowering that we get with vildagliptin. And how many times we give, it doesn't matter because metformin anyway, we have to give twice daily. So when we combine it with metformin, I don't see an issue there actually.
But what is your opinion regarding whenever you use vildagliptin, you need to check the liver enzymes, and every 3 months follow-up you have to do the repeated. This is a way many studies they have suggested. Whereas with linagliptin, everything, that type of checking this liver enzyme is not mandatory.
No, sir. These are all misconceptions actually. I've never checked liver enzymes in any patient. I've been using vildagliptin from 2009 actually. Okay. So there is no guidance to actually check liver enzymes in any patient. So what happened during the vildagliptin trial, when they started the vildagliptin trial, was that they had 2 dose groups actually. Obviously, they wanted to have a molecule which is once daily vildagliptin. They gave a once daily 100 milligram vildagliptin, and they had an arm where 50 milligram vildagliptin 2 times daily. In the arm in which they gave 100 milligram once daily vildagliptin, they found statistically more number of patients with liver enzyme abnormalities. This is what happened during the registration of the vildagliptin. So it was a very new molecule. There was always fear that it may cause some accidental liver injury, etc. And this was in the year 2005-6, that era actually, when it was first coming in. And at that time, there was some thought that it may cause some liver enzyme abnormality or whatnot. But now we have an experience of almost 15, 16 years of using this molecule all over the world from the phase 3 trial till now. So we have not seen, I have not seen a single case of liver failure occurring because of vildagliptin. In fact, the patients get better because their glycemic control improves, the liver function improves actually. So there are a lot of literature with gliptins and NAFLD also improvement. So what I feel is, it's a very good molecule. I mean, we don't need to check any liver enzymes, nothing. So any DPP4 inhibitor for that matter, vildagliptin, linagliptin, sitagliptin, any molecule, all are the same, I feel. The advantage with Vilda is that, it is generic and it costs less, and we can give it to our general population like anything actually.
What linagliptin, sir?
Linagliptin, the only advantage is that, it has got data, cardiovascular outcome data. So cardiovascular outcome data in the form of Carmelina and Carolina trials is excellent with linagliptin. And the company has focused in those patients who have renal dysfunction actually. You can give the dose without modifying the dose. That's what they say. Modification of dose is not a major advantage. I feel that reducing the dose is actually better because it costs less actually. So if 50 milligram 2 times costs you 20 rupees, 15 rupees now, and if you're going to give only 1 tablet, it costs you 7 rupees actually. So it's an advantage and not a disadvantage, I feel, if you have to reduce the dose. So only thing you need to do is when the patient gets renal dysfunction is reduce the dose of the gliptin by half. Instead of giving BD, you give OD.
But the reports from UK and the US studies, they have shown that comparing linagliptin, Sita and Vilda, the study results, they have shown that with the vildagliptin and the sitagliptin, so around 30 to 40% of the patients with the type 2 diabetes mellitus with the CKD, they are taking unlicensed dose with the Sita and the vildagliptin. 1 out of 4 patients with the vildagliptin and 2 out of 5 patients with the sitagliptin, because they don't monitor the CKD everything. Even the eGFR comes down without knowing that. Even in the UK and the US, they are taking the inappropriate dose with the Sita and the Vilda. That results in some of the complications. Whereas with the linagliptin, because there is no need for the dose modification, even without monitoring the CKD levels, without monitoring the eGFR levels, if you give linagliptin, there is no risk of all other things. They are taking the licensed dose. What is your opinion?
That's correct, sir. That's correct. What you're saying is absolutely right, sir. So what I feel is it depends on the setting actually. If the patient can afford linagliptin, we should use linagliptin. There is nothing wrong. And it is obviously safer because we don't have to change the dose. There need not be any dosing error because, you know, the patient's renal function may be variable. So today the patient may have good kidney function, but after that they will have some small injury or something, go to a orthopedic surgeon, they give some painkiller, NSAID, the kidney function drops, but you still keep on giving the same dose of gliptin. So this may be potentially harmful to the patient. So obviously giving lina that way in that setting will be making sense actually. But we need to look at the substantially higher cost also. It is around 45 rupees and this is only 10 rupees actually. So cost is a major advantage in our setting, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely.
But do you switch over between gliptins when you don't achieve the target HbA1c?
No, I will add some other agent, madam. I will not switch between one gliptin to the other because I feel that all of them have got similar kind of efficacy. And if I don't see any effect at all, I do discontinue actually. So it is true that, you know, around 5% of our patients may have primary failure to any agent. Like any agent you start, they may have a primary failure. They may not respond as well as the 95% other patients actually. So if the patient comes and tells that in the tablet soft control romba jastiya irukku, like that, then I will usually discontinue the tablet. And if the HbA1c, sometimes what happens, the HbA1c actually increases after adding a gliptin to a patient. That happens also around 5% of the time. So, but what we know is that 80% to 90% of the time the sugar will come down, okay, but around 5% of the time it does increase actually. So in those individuals, that means that they are primary failures to that molecule. So we should, you know, discontinue the molecule. But in the course of time, you know, with the patient is doing well, controlled well, and you know, doing very well, then if the sugar starts going up, we need to add an agent and do lifestyle modification to try to bring back the patient to control.
So which gliptin is safer for cardiac patients?
I feel that all gliptins are safe for cardiac patients, sir. I don't think that there is any problem. Only thing is we want to see, when you say cardiac patients, what is the cardiac condition we need to see. If the patient has a history of heart failure, then we should avoid saxagliptin and alogliptin because these two gliptins have been shown to increase the risk of heart failure by 20 to 30% actually. But when you compare to, like for example, we don't think twice about using pioglitazone. Okay, see, pioglitazone is widely used in rural areas, etc. Pioglitazone increases the risk of heart failure by 2 times, 200% actually, whereas saxagliptin will increase the risk of heart failure by 20 to 30%. Okay, so it is a 10-fold higher increase in heart failure will occur when you are using pioglitazone. So when we are ready to use pioglitazone unquestioningly, so we should be fairly liberal with using gliptins, even including saxagliptin. If a patient is on saxa, I usually do not stop the saxagliptin. I continue the saxagliptin. I continue the saxagliptin. I continue the saxagliptin, and I will tell the patient, I will slowly switch the patient to some other gliptin if the patient develops a heart failure.
So what about teneligliptin, sir?
Teneligliptin is a black box. We don't know. We don't have any data actually. It's better that it's good that the vildagliptin got off patent and we stopped using teneligliptin so much actually. It's tested only 800 patients. We don't have data. Based on the 800 patients data, we have given it to more than 8 million people.
Yes, nowadays the teneligliptin is more promoting all companies, sir. So what about the use?
No, I also used. I wouldn't lie actually, because everybody has used it, so it's available. It's approved by our regulator.
Cost
Our
wise is
regulator
also
has
low,
got a
sir.
lower bar actually. So what I think is, I am very skeptical when it comes to a molecule which is approved only in India but not approved anywhere else. I am very, very skeptical of that molecule actually. Okay. So because our regulatory process can be gamed, I mean, our country, there will be money changing under the table and then they will give approval. We don't have the data out in the public. Fraud is likely to happen in our situation. We know how our country is every time. So we need to be careful and suspicious as doctors whenever a molecule is approved only in India and not anywhere else, basically. So if it is approved in any other country also, then it's okay. So then we can say that, this is a genuine molecule and this thing, or especially if it is a developed country, actually. So that way, teneligliptin had some approval in Japan and South Korea before coming to India, I guess. So, I would say that, it's a fairly okay molecule. At least there is some data from the regulators abroad, actually. So, but it does not have widely published data, actually, teneli.
Are there any minor cardiac concerns with the vildagliptin, sir?
Only in the VIVID study, they found that the end diastolic diameter increases actually in the VIVID trial, but they did not show any clinical deterioration of heart failure. What this represents, we don't know. It may be just a numerical imbalance, statistical thing actually. But we don't see any higher rate of heart failure with vildagliptin in observational studies actually.
And a word on once daily dosage now available for vildagliptin.
Actually speaking, I'm not a big fan of the once daily dose because of what happened during the registration trial. Specifically, it moved from once daily to twice daily in order to avoid the liver enzyme abnormality. So I'm not sure why the company wants to introduce once daily vildagliptin actually, and it has been approved by the drug
regulator. Kindly mute.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Kamaraj sir, you have to mute yourself.
Kamaraj, please mute yourself.
JCB advisement
Sir, Kamaraj sir.
Kamaraj, yeah. Dr. Anand, you have made a beautiful presentation. You have beautifully covered and all the gliptins, and as you rightly told, in our setup, our patients, the cost is a main factor. Most of our patients, they are not affordable with the high cost of Lina, Sita, everything. But the choosy patients, those people who are affordable and with the CKD, all those issues, then we can go for Lina. Whereas with all these data with vildagliptin and a lot of standard companies coming out with the genetic of vilda, we can utilize that efficacy and safety data of vildagliptin, and we can put for more number of our patients. As you rightly told, teneli, I am not a big fan of teneli. I have not used it even for a single patient because of this QT elongation, all those things, and no safety data available. but Vilda for our country it is well suited. As you rightly told, with the evidence from a verified trial, we can initiate very early. We can start and we can achieve the benefits. Thank you very much. Thank you. You made a wonderful thing.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for the session and thanks for your time,
Thank you.
sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll move on to the thank you address by our Finance Secretary, Dr. Satish Kumar.
Satish. Satish, are you on the line? Satish Kumar?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please, you can go ahead with the vote of thanks.
Hello?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Sorry for the inconvenience. It's my pleasure being with you all here today. And Dr. Anand sir being in Bangalore, his accent in Tamil is as though that he is in South Tamil Nadu, very near to our hearts, sir. And your valuable thoughts selecting the gliptins really made us to think twice on cheaper gliptins which are available. Really, in our DCD, we usually say that what we learn today, we will try to practice tomorrow. Such as today's topic also, your authentic presentation on vildagliptin and the availability of the molecule as generic product has made us to think to select the right gliptins for the right patient. I thank our chairman, sir, Dr. Anbutchelvan, sir, and our secretary, Dr. Anita, madam, and our patron, Dr. Muralidharan, sir, and the pharma people who made this program a possibility. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good night. Good night, everyone.
Good night, sir.
Good night, sir.
So thank you all. Now I'm ending the meeting.
Thank you to all.